On March 3rd of 1972, Robert Welch delivered a speech at our council dinner held not very far from here at the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles. The title of his address was, "Success is in the Silences." During that talk, Mr. Welch explained how he developed the title. It came from a famous quatrain by Bliss Carman, which reads as follows: "Have little care that life is brief, and less that art is long. Success is in the silences, though fame is in the song." Those are profound words. Mr. Welch went on to explain that it is not the recognized, but the silent victories that are the true measure of our success. He nevertheless acknowledged that it is human nature to want to see visible results for our labors. And of course, the major media has done their best over the years to ensure that our successes have been met with silence. But due to the diligence of some of our members, the media has had a difficult time ignoring us, especially of late. Let me give a couple of examples. Many of you probably saw the article in this month's bulletin of the John Birch Society about our veteran section leader Al Foreman in Indiana. Al got front page coverage in the local newspapers with a headline reading, "Commissioners urge House vote to leave UN." The newspaper summed up the story as follows, quote, "Outgoing Elkhart County Commissioners Phil Neff and Martin McCloskey and current member Phil Stiver supported a resolution brought to them by Al Foreman, Elkhart resident and John Birch Society member. In a unanimous vote, the commissioners urged the Indiana congressional delegation and the entire United States Congress to support a House bill to withdraw the United States from the United Nations." Unquote. The positive coverage continues. The Salt Lake Tribune for January 28th ran a story headline, "Resolution Opposed NAFTA-like Pact," with a subhead that read, "The message, it aims to alert Congress to the possible dangers of joining the free trade area of the Americas." Unquote. Let me read just a little bit more in that article. Quote, "One northern Utah senator is pushing his anti-internationalist agenda through the state legislature. Last year, Senator Dave Thomas, Republican of South Weber, co-sponsored a failed resolution urging Congress to get out of the United Nations. Now he is pushing for a resolution to discourage Congress from entering the free trade area of the Americas." Unquote. But it gets even better. One of our most effective members, again, received coverage for her hard work in that area. Quote, "Ann Turner, who chairs the committee to stop the FTAA for northern Utah, urged the committee to alert Congress of potential dangers of the agreement. We have," she said, "a hard enough time regulating ourselves, let alone trying to control an entire hemisphere and the way they treat each other." Unquote. And there's more good news. The Utah Senate passed SR 1 on February 7th. Now, that's the bill that this senator proposed, and it was passed on February 7th by a vote of 21-7. This resolution discourages U.S. participation in the FTAA, and a nearly identical resolution was passed in the House just yesterday. The reason we're reading about our members' activities in the news is that we are making an impact. There's no question that the insiders, the leaders of the international communist conspiracy, are very concerned about our campaign to stop the FTAA. They know too well its potential to alert and awaken a significant portion of the American public in time to thwart their efforts. And they're losing their grip. They may still control the mass media, But as you have seen, there are still some fair-minded journalists in smaller newspapers across America who will give our story a fair hearing. Recall that President George W. Bush stated in 2002, quote, "We're working to build a free trade area of the Americas, and we're determined to complete those negotiations by January of 2005, unquote. Well, folks, January has come and gone, and the insiders are still far from their goal. So who is making it difficult to get this internationalist trap through Congress? Certainly, the work of members of the John Birch Society. As I'm sure you've noticed, we've had precious little help from other so-called conservative groups in fighting the FTAA. They've been caught up in partisan politics for the past few months, busily getting the Republican president reelected. It's very difficult for them, isn't it, to work hard to get the president reelected and then stand up and oppose this project of his to bring about regional and then world government. As we embark on another 4-year journey with a Republican president, it's interesting to recall what Robert Welch humorously stated way back in 1965 in one of our bulletins. He said, quote, "The press is full of charges by several nationally prominent politicians that the John Birch Society is trying to steal the Republican Party. The statement is quite erroneous for a number of reasons, one being simply that the John Birch Society never engages in petty larceny." Unfortunately, the present Republican administration's spending habits have become anything but petty. You would think that a supposedly conservative administration would avoid costly and needless foreign entanglements. George Bush, however, is calling for a federal spending of $2.5 trillion, an increase of $89 billion in the annual budget. He's also asked for $81 billion in supplemental war funding for Iraq. That's almost the entire budget increase. And Iraq and Afghanistan are not the end of our outlays in money and blood. The Bush team has been sending their attack dog, Condoleezza Rice, on a saber-rattling tour with the intent of embroiling us in more wars. The likely battlegrounds are Iran and North Korea. Two recent reports confirm this view. A February 9th Associated Press article said that Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice warned Iran on Wednesday that it risks UN action if negotiations with Europe over nuclear program don't progress. Apparently, Secretary Rice now has the authority to speak for the UN. Or does the UN have the authority to speak for the United States? When a member of the Council on Foreign Relations is speaking, particularly one as ruthless and ambitious as Condoleezza Rice, it's sometimes hard to tell the difference. The Rice message was blunt. The Iranians need to get that message, she said, and she followed up with a thinly veiled threat that there are other steps the United Nations can take. The next day, news headlines exclaimed that North Korea now admits that it has nuclear weapons and that it refused to return to the disarmament talks. Secretary Rice responded predictably by reprimanding the North Koreans and telling them that there would be consequences for their actions. It seems obvious that we're following the same path in North Korea that the CFR has led us down so many times before. Build up a country with aid and trade, and then go to war against that country as the enemy that it has created. Which brings me to a very important topic, the horrors of perpetual war. The dismal concept of perpetual war for perpetual peace is depicted in George Orwell's 1984, a work that most of you are very familiar with. Consider Orwell's character, Winston Smith, who despairs in passages such as this, quote, Winston could not definitely remember a time when his country had not been at war, unquote. In the book, the purpose for this state of perpetual war was, of course, not to defend the fictitious nation of Oceania against the same perpetual enemies, but against a rotating selection of enemies that existed solely for the purpose of giving Big Brother an excuse to wage perpetual war. Perpetual war, in turn, was the pretext offered by Big Brother for perpetual slavery. Orwell's work might be dismissed as fiction, but an influential MIT professor named Lincoln P. Bloomfield drafted plans for real-world megalomaniacs who set their sights as high as Big Brother's. Bloomfield was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a leading architect in our State Department's plan to exploit never-ending crises to justify building up the United Nations. As many of you recall, Bloomfield prepared the infamous report, A World Effectively Controlled by the United Nations. In that blueprint for world government, Bloomfield wrote, quote, would the United States itself seriously consider disbanding its own armaments and abrogating to an international authority beyond its direct control the authority and the power to do those things which have been the prerogative of the nation? Bloomfield envisioned, quote, a crisis, a war, a brink of war situation so grave or commonly menacing that deeply rooted attitudes and practices are sufficiently shaken to open the possibility of a revolution in world political arrangements, unquote. And that is what 9/11 and our current war in Iraq have provided. These crises not only soften opposition to the United Nations, but they are also used as an excuse to undermine constitutional government and the separation of powers. Bloomfield also stated, quote, a grave crisis of war would be needed to bring about a sudden transformation in national attitudes sufficient for the purpose. The order we examine, and let me finish and add what he's really saying. He's saying the New World Order we examine may be brought into existence as a result of a series of sudden, nasty, and traumatic shocks, unquote. Bloomfield and his conspiratorial cohorts know only too well that an uninformed people will most assuredly fall prey to this scheme of constant warfare. As history teaches us, this is an unfortunate trait of human nature. The use of war by tyrants or would-be tyrants is so institutionalized that even Shakespeare referred to it in his Henry IV, wherein the king counseled his son, be at thy course to busy giddy minds with foreign quarrels. The reason over 1,400 Americans have lost their lives in Iraq has little to do with Saddam Hussein or weapons of mass destruction or even our so-called war on terrorism. One policy that the insiders have no intention of changing is a foreign policy that makes extensive use of warfare to achieve their objectives. And that's why the John Birch Society is needed now more than ever. The answers to our present national dilemma are not going to be found in partisan politics or on relying on politicians intent on getting us deeper and deeper into war and debt. The answers are now and have always been in building an informed body of citizens in a majority of congressional districts. The answers will be found when sufficient numbers of well-informed Americans hold their elected officials' feet to the fire and when they quickly vote out of office any who compromise our constitutional form of government. In short, the answers to our problems will come when we, you and me, link arms with other Birchers and local chapters and all our members across this land, devote our time, energy, and our resources to build the John Birch Society into the organized force envisioned by Robert Welch. Mr. Welch stated, many of our successes will be achieved in silence. But it is the accumulation of these silent successes that will determine our ultimate fate. There are no quick fixes, but if we will stay fast, and if we will keep our eye on the ball, we will have less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. Thank you very much.